Well, Mr. McKinnon, who has a form of autism called Asperger's syndrome, does admit accessing US government computers but claims he was looking for evidence of UFOs. The Home Secretary told MPs that McKinnon was seriously ill. He could have faced 60 years in an American prison if he was found guilty. Well, former Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ming Campbell has written a report on Britain's extradition treaty with the US for his party and joins me now. Good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, what's your reaction to this decision?
Well, I think it was a very difficult decision, and in that sense, Gary McKinnon's mother is quite right. But what I think was the clincher, if I can put it colloquially, was that Theresa May had the evidence of two independent psychiatrists who had seen Gary McKinnon in the course of the last month. And they confirmed the fact that he had a condition which was of such a nature that he might well take his own life were he to be sent, extradited to the United States. And that confirmed earlier judgments by other doctors who had been instructed on behalf of the McKinnon family. Now, faced with that, it would have been very difficult indeed for Theresa May not to say this is a risk that we're unwilling to take.
Yeah, now the US Department of Justice say that this doesn't set a precedent, but how does it not set a precedent?
Well, because these were very, very special circumstances, and Theresa May went out of her way to say that, and I don't think anyone in the House of Commons listening to her would have given any credence to the idea that this was establishing a precedent. And I think if you listen very carefully over the next 2 or 3 days, all the briefing that goes on from the government and the Home Office in particular will be designed to make that point as often as there are opportunities to do so.
Well, we're about to speak to a family member of someone who was extradited with Asperger's syndrome only recently in a moment, and I'm sure he'll make the point that this ought to be a precedent. Looking forward to the future, there's much talk now of a forum bar to be introduced. What does that mean?
Well, forum bar is a sort of easy way of describing that. Whereas at the moment, if the United States makes an application for the extradition of someone and there's a question as to whether the case should be prosecuted in this country or in the United States, that decision is made by the Director of Public Prosecutions. It's a prosecutor's decision. But what forum bar, as Theresa May outlined it, and she's going to make sure that it doesn't operate as yet another delaying tactic, what forum bar essentially does is to say any decision about where a case should be prosecuted should be taken in public and by a judge. And that's quite an important reform. It may seem not very much to those who are not directly concerned in these issues, but it is actually quite an important change.
Yeah, and is it a change that the US will welcome?
I have no reason to doubt that they should, that they won't welcome it. Let's be quite clear. It's in the interest of both our countries, United States and United Kingdom, that we have an effective system of extradition in cases where it's justified. And anything which gets in the way of that is damaging to us both. But we've also got to have a system which commands public confidence. And the difficulty for this government, coalition government, is it inherited a set of circumstances caused by the previous Labour government, I'm sorry to say, which entered into the treaty with the United States, which many people have regarded as being, to some extent, one-sided and disadvantageous to British citizens.
Well, we have the former Labour Home Secretary, Alan Johnson, saying that this decision's been taken in the Conservative Party's interests and not the interests of the country.
Well, I didn't agree with that. Alan Johnson's someone for whom I have a great deal of admiration, but his was the only voice raised to that effect in the House of Commons today. And I respectfully disagree with Alan Johnson, if I can put it that way.
All right, Sir Ming Campbell, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. Also with us tonight is Hamja Ahsan, who's the brother of terror suspect Syed Talha Ahsan, who was extradited to the US earlier this month. He also has Asperger's syndrome. Good evening to you.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. What do you make, first of all, of today's decision to block Gary McKinnon's extradition?
I'm delighted for Gary McKinnon's family, and I'm someone who campaigned for Gary McKinnon. I wasn't just campaigning for my brother, I was campaigning for Richard O'Dwyer, for Barbara, for Talha. So I'm very happy for her, and I'm very happy for her because Gary McKinnon and his family don't have to go through the nightmare and horror that my family have been going through the past My brother's in solitary confinement in an American prison. I haven't even heard from him, not a single phone call. I'm terrified. I've seen the way America's treated Christopher Tappin, a 65-year-old guy, affluent classes, to put him in solitary confinement with all the lights on, with no stimuli. So I dread to think how Talha's been treated.
You presumably just heard there Ming Campbell talking about how this was a very special case. That's the way it's been described by Home Secretary Theresa May. Do you think that Gary McKinnon's had special treatment?
The Daily Mail back Gary McKinnon's case, and no government of the day wants to upset the Daily Mail. The same newspaper which campaigns against extradition for British citizens refers to me, my brother and Barbara as other unwanted guests. So there's some inequality there. Talha has the same diagnosis as Gary McKinnon, which is Asperger's syndrome, and he has an assessed suicide risk in the same way. And let's bear in mind, in American solitary confinement, 50% of suicides take place. Recently,
when you say he was assessed as a suicide risk, because this is quite an important point here. This is what it boils down to: that Gary McKinnon has Asperger's, but it was the high suicide risk, as confirmed by 5 experts, that apparently swung the balance. Are you saying that your brother has been similarly assessed?
Yes, my brother was seen by American criminologist, and also by 2 medical legal reports in Britain by Dr. Quentin Dealey, and our MP Sadiq Khan, who's Labour's Shadow Justice Secretary, wanted to bring it to the Home Office's attention. And
why didn't you do that before? Do you now regret that you didn't bring the fact that your brother might be a suicide risk to the attention of the authorities?
Lots of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture wanted to intervene and say, prolonged solitary confinement is torture, because it is under many forms of international legislation, and Liberty wanted to intervene in our judgment, but the Home Office wouldn't listen to us and wouldn't grant us that opportunity. So,
Do you think if the decision on Gary McKinnon had been taken before the decision was taken on your brother, things might be different?
That Gary McKinnon's decision was delayed to after my brother was removed, as Theresa May said, and there was often talk of precedents. So, if one suicide or Asperger's case is not, granted, I'm very sorry. It's an extremely difficult time. So.
No, I can imagine. I just want to focus again on this issue of suicide risk. At what point during the lengthy appeals system did your brother's suicide risk and clinically assessed suicide risk, if that was the case, be brought to everyone's attention?
It was, the things I've just mentioned before, the American criminologist and the thing that's fresh evidence, and that's one of the lines the Home Office is using amongst its many management speak BS, is that even within America there are people bringing the ADX Florence to court. There's been cases of suicides, of people developing psychosis, self-harm, and they're bringing the American prison system to an American court and challenging it. So
what do you make? Bearing in mind where your brother is now, what do you make of Theresa May's decision-making process?
I think it's the right decision, and it was a principled decision, but it's, outrageous double standards and quite stark and clear, obvious hypocrisy. Whatever type of officialdom speak they'll use, whatever management speak, it's stark and clear to anyone. Go on social media and that's what everyone's talking about.
And just finally, Hamja, and I know it's difficult for you, and I'll let you go in a moment. You talked about your brother's condition over there in America. Have you managed to have any contact whatsoever?
We haven't even had he hadn't even had a phone call. He used to talk to me every day. We have had absolutely nothing whatsoever. Part of pre-trial solitary confinement is to break someone down. All we know is the trial date's been set till next year in October, so he was already detained for 6 years without trial or charge evidence, and he's been held a further. This is the longest time in British history people have been. He's the co-defendant of someone called Barbara Ahmed. So it's very sad.
Hamja, listen, I know it's difficult, and I really appreciate you coming on the programme tonight.
Okay, thank you
very much indeed. That's Hamja Ahsan there, brother of Syed Talha Ahsan, held in America, suffering from Asperger's syndrome. He mentioned the newspapers tomorrow, the Daily Mail, does have their front pages washed out with the story about Gary McKinnon. A great day for Gary and British justice after a 3-year Mail campaign bitterly opposed by America, British courts and civil servants. Theresa May yesterday courageously decided Asperger's sufferer Gary McKinnon will not be extradited for hacking Pentagon computers in pursuit of little green men. Edwin, briefly, it's on the other fronts as well. What are they saying?
It's on lots of the fronts. The Scotsman does it pretty well. Mother of hacker welcomes victory for the little person. And the Eye again picks up mother's joy as hacker is saved from extradition.
OK, David Bermingham joins me now, was one of the NatWest Three, the British bankers who ended up in a US jail after losing a high-profile fight against extradition. Hello, David.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. Alex Massey is here as well, freelance journalist who writes for The Spectator. Hello, Alex.
Good evening.
David, what do you make, first of all, of claims that the UK government's picking and choosing who's extradited?
Well, I think, unfortunately, I've been writing about this and banging on about it for some considerable time. I was not aware of the suicide diagnosis for Talha Ahsan, but I have campaigned, as have many other people, Hamja and the Baba Ahmed campaign, for these two gentlemen for some time to be tried in Britain. The really sad thing about the cases of Baba Ahmed and Talha Ahsan is that they appear to have been deliberately bundled up in the blanket marked Abu Hamza, in order to get them off in short order to the United States with a minimum of possible negative comment. Now, those cases, Baba Ahmed and Talha Ahsan, have been around, as Hamja just said, for years and years and years. And what not a lot of people know is that every single senior member of the current cabinet who was in Parliament in 2006, including Theresa May, David Cameron, Nick Clegg, the Attorney General Dominic Grieve, every single one of those voted for, on 3 separate occasions in 2006, the Forum Amendment that was today announced by Theresa May. And that Forum Amendment would have, not might have, but would have prevented the extradition of Baba Ahmed and Talha Ahsan.
So, David, do you think it's coincidence then that this case has happened now, just a few weeks after the other case, or something more sinister than that?
Well, I mean, I'm a great conspiracy theorist simply because, you know, an awful lot of bad things have happened in the past to an awful lot of people. But what I would say is that the timing, the undue haste with which Baba Ahmed and Talha Ahsan were bundled together with Abu Hamza and stuck on a plane 10 days ago, I think sits very, very badly. It sticks in the craw of an awful lot of people.
Okay.
Because, you know, had that decision been made, or had the announcement on Forum been made prior to them being put on a plane, an awful lot of people would have said, well, hang on a minute, the whole Forum debate for the last 8 years has been all about people like this.
Yeah.
Even the judge in the extradition case, the magistrate back in 2004, described Baba Ahmed's case, which was co-joined with Talha Ahsan, as difficult and troubling because it was quite clear that it could have been tried in the UK, but for the lack of evidence.